why don't we say, let's make a product which is good for our customer so we can view our customer as a human being rather than a wallet? To operate out of principled, centered leadership. You don't have to hire a lawyer to tell you what's right or wrong in most cases. Yeah, there's a few gray areas here and there every now and then, but as a general rule, you don't have to hire a lawyer to know what's right. You don't have to hire an attorney to know what's fair. Hello and welcome to Christ Church's Leadership Podcast in the Wesleyan tradition. I'm Charles Kyker, your host, and today I want to begin by kind of giving you a few quotes from Simon Sinek, where he and Craig Groeschel had an interchange not too long ago, and I thought it was very fascinating, and I didn't expect to get the leadership lesson that I got out of it, nor did I expect to get the information, which was absolutely mind-blowing and eye-opening for me. Craig actually asked Simon Sinek, who, if you're not familiar, is one of the premier persons in leadership today of his generation. John Maxwell's largely known as one of the premier leadership experts, but of course, Simon is a generation before John. And Simon has also spoken at the Global Leadership Summit, and if I can put a plug in for that, August the 7th and the 8th here of 2025. We would love for you to attend Christ Church if you're in the Hickory, Unifor area. If not, there are plenty of sites in your area. Even if you are in a different country and you're listening to our podcast today, there may likely be a site near you. I know where we do medical mission work in Ghana, there's a Global Leadership Summit presentation there, along with many countries in West Africa, East Africa, Europe, other places around the world. But the question Craig asked Simon was, is there something now that we need to be thinking differently about than we've ever thought about before? Is there something we need to be thinking differently about? Is there something you're thinking differently about than ever before? And Simon's answer was 100%. He said, in our country, there was in the 1970s and 1980s, there was an economist named Milton Friedman. Milton Friedman wrote an article for the New York Times, and it was entitled this: "The purpose of business is to maximize profits within the bounds of the rules." The purpose of business is to maximize profits within the bounds of the rules. This speaks nothing, by the way, of ethics and standards. It was embraced in the day and has become so embraced in our culture today that it's almost just become the motto of every corporation, every board, and obviously, if you are a publicly traded company, it drives you for profits. You've got to make a profit. Whatever the estimated profit, the anticipated profit is, if you don't make that target, you can be seen as a failure. It was embraced by people in the day like Jack Welch. Jack Welch, who was the CEO of General Electric, who was heralded as one of the great leaders, one of the great CEOs for 20 years. Jack Welch, in order to make profits and make sure GE was profitable, had the 10% rule. I don't know if you know anything about this. Jack reveals it in his books. He's written 2 books, one primarily on leadership, but it's the 10%. You will let go of the bottom 10% of your performers. You'll let them go. Now, it could be that there are particular departments not meeting, the standards or whatever, whether it was the production of engines for airplanes or whatever. GE had several different areas. It was a huge corporation. And so the bottom 10% were eliminated every year. Well, that made people want to scramble, to do their absolute best, was the thinking behind all of that. Simon challenges this by saying that it was embraced by the culture in the 80s, 90s, and even today. Mass layoffs, Simon says, did not exist historically prior to the 1970s. They didn't exist. When people miss their numbers, things don't come in as strong, then you will lose your job. I mean, that's just now common accepting. I mean, people commonly accept that, and it's considered normal. All of this, Simon says, has to be thrown away. Now we should view human beings as human beings. Example here where the world has gone haywire in our own country, in the United States of America, cereal and candy bars have all kinds of chemicals and carcinogens in them that the American Food Company is actually making a candy bar in Germany and in Europe that's different. What it contains is different than what we eat in the United States. I mean, they use sugar in Germany and in Europe. We use what? High fructose corn syrup. Is that good for you? No. Are the carcinogens and the chemicals that they put in them, the red dyes, you could go on and on. We are killing ourselves in the United States for the food that we're eating because it's good for profits. But if it's not good for people, it's good for profits because high fructose corn syrup is a lot cheaper than cane sugar. And what bothers me is I go to Kauai about every 4 or 5 years just because I think it's one of the most beautiful places on earth. Out of all the Hawaiian Islands, I think it's one of the most untouched. Plus, you get to view the Grand Canyon of the Pacific when you go there. It's a beautiful sight. But when we started going there in the late 1990s with our young children, there were cane fields everywhere. But those cane fields are all gone. And it's because for profit. Sugar is better for you than high fructose corn syrup. So what Simon says is, why don't we say, let's make a product which is good for our customer so we can view our customer as a human being rather than a wallet. Phenomenal understanding, isn't it? To operate out of principle-centered leadership. Principle-centered leadership. He goes on to say in their conversation, you don't have to hire a lawyer to tell you what's right or wrong in most cases. Yeah, there's a few gray areas here and there every now and then, but as a general rule, you don't have to hire a lawyer to know what's right. You don't have to hire an attorney to know what's fair. We're incentivizing people today as leaders to make decisions that are best for the bottom line rather than what's best for people, better for the company. During World War II, there were so many young men who actually, this is historical, many young men committed suicide because they were not chosen for the draft. Or health-wise, they weren't able to serve. They felt so bad about themselves because several of their friends and many people they graduated high school with and on, or they worked in the factory with, they went off to war to defend the enemy after Pearl Harbor was bombed, or after the Germans were trying to take over the world, Nazi Germany. And they felt so bad, many of them committed suicide because they weren't able to sacrifice for their country. Today, we don't think about sacrificing for the better whole. We think about what's good for me. What's good for me? What's good for my family? That's why I'm going to, I guess, be more candid than I should here on the podcast, but that's why I find a great deal of humor in this whole talk of the tariffs. We can't stand it if the stock market goes down 5%. The world is falling apart. We can't stand to do anything if it's not good for me and for my family right now. Forget about what's good for the long haul. Forget about what's good for bringing jobs back to the United States, having factories once again, producing our own product. You know what tears me apart? And we found this out during COVID. And I was more concerned. There was a lot of things that probably needed to be raised as far as justice issue. I'll give you that. But we were like crazy trying to come up with justice things. But I didn't see anybody protest. I didn't see anybody storm the White House. I didn't see anybody storm the state capitol of North Carolina over this sheer reality. And it still exists today. And it scares the weebie-jeebies out of me. 90% of the pharmaceutical products that are produced in China for the United States. We don't produce our own medicine. Is that not a national security issue? Sorry, folks, I'm getting too pumped up now. But I just think that's crazy. I think that's ludicrous. I mean, grandma could die if somebody put something in her medicine. And well, anyway, enough said. We're concerned more about the bottom line than we are people. Here's the paradox of all that. Who pays more for medicine any place in the world? The United States does. We pay for R&D. We pay for development of all the medicines that the rest of the world benefits from, and yet we're paying anywhere between 300 and 3,000% more for our pharmaceutical products than the rest of the world does. I was going to buy doxycycline for a Ghana mission 2 years ago. They were $78 for 30 tablets. When my plane landed, I went to the local pharmacy in Ghana where the doxycycline is produced in Germany, and I paid $6. If that just says anything. People should be valued. And I love what he says. Simon says, and I'll conclude, but then we're going to launch into the Old Testament reading today, which is so apropos for this conversation. But Simon says we should get it in proper order. Profit is important. If companies don't make a profit, they obviously go out of business. So it's not that we don't consider profit. Of course we do. We have to. Otherwise, you can't pay the people that work for the business, and you can't produce a product and provide a service if it doesn't have a profit. But he says we need to serve people and live into these three things. Purpose. Well, first of all, we focus on people, and then our purpose, and then profit. In other words, your best asset out of all that you have, you may have great manufacturing capacity. You may provide a great service with what you're servicing people with, but your people are your greatest asset. When we forget that, we value profit more than people. So focus on people, have them live into their purpose and live into the purpose of your company. And then thirdly, of course, then you want to make a profit. Well, our text today is from 1 Samuel chapter 14. And from 1 Samuel chapter 14 in our one-year Bible reading, we're looking at a powerful story here. Saul impulsively, and I underscore the word impulsively, lifts up something that could be seen, and so not to totally throw Saul under the bus here, could be seen as a noble spiritual gesture. And that is, we're going into the battle, so therefore we will fast. We will fast as we go into battle. So no one is to eat anything, okay? That could be seen as an act of sacrifice. It could be seen as a noble thing and a noble gesture at first, but it was impulsive. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. So that's what Saul decreed. The only problem is Jonathan didn't know that. And Jonathan is Saul's son. Jonathan was out spying out some of the area. And so then we go down to verse 24 here in 1 Samuel. I wanted to give you that important background where it says, "Now the men of Israel were pressed to exhaustion that day because Saul had placed them under an oath, saying, 'Let a curse fall on anyone who eats before evening, before I have full revenge on my enemies.' So no one ate anything all day, even though they had all found honeycomb on the ground in the forest. They didn't dare touch the honey because they all feared the oath that they had taken. But Jonathan had not heard his father's command, and he dipped the end of his stick into a piece of honeycomb, and he ate the honey. After he'd eaten it, he felt refreshed. But one of the men saw it and said, 'Your father made the army take a strict oath that anyone who eats the food today will be cursed. That's why everyone is weary and faint.' 'My father's made trouble for us all,' Jonathan exclaimed. 'A command like that only hurts us. See how refreshed I am now that I've eaten this little bit of honey. If the men had been allowed to eat freely from the food they found among their enemies, think how many more Philistines we could have killed.' So they chased and killed the Philistines all day from Michmash to Aijalon, and they became more and more faint. That evening they rushed for the battle plunder and butchered the sheep, goats, cattle, calves, but they ate them without draining the blood. Someone reported to Saul, "Look, the men are sinning against the Lord by eating meat that still has blood in it." "That's very wrong," Saul said. "Find a large stone and roll it over here. Then go out among the troops and tell them, bring the cattle, the sheep, the goats, and bring them here to me. Kill them here and drain the blood before you eat them. Do not sin against the Lord by eating meat with blood still in it." So that night, all the troops brought their animals and slaughtered them there. Then Saul built an altar to the Lord. It was the first of the altars he built for the Lord. And so then we understand in verse 42 to 46 that Saul, of course, is praying, and then they realize that Saul is getting ready to go and kill even more Philistines, but the priests come to him and say, "Hey, have we asked God about this?" It's a novel thought. Have we asked God whether he wants us to continue in battle? And so Saul prayed, and he didn't hear anything. And he said, wait a minute, there's a blockage here. And there could be a blockage in your life and my life if it comes to disobedience. If we're disobedient to God, there could easily be a blockage in hearing from God, of course. And so Saul believed that they needed to call the people together and the soldiers, and they needed to cast lots. And they did. And then they found out that there was someone who had disobeyed Saul's earlier order of not eating anything. So verse 42, then Saul said, "Now let's cast lots again and choose between me and Jonathan," because when they had cast lots, they had shown that it was Saul and Jonathan who were likely the guilty party, and the people were not guilty. So then they cast lots between Saul and Jonathan, and Jonathan was shown to be the guilty one. "Tell me what you've done," Saul demanded of Jonathan. "I tasted a little honey," Jonathan admitted. "It was only a little bit on the end of my stick. Does that deserve death?" "Yes, Jonathan," Saul said, "you must die. May God strike me and even kill me if you do not die for this." But the people broke in and said to Saul, "Jonathan has won the great victory for Israel. Should he die? Far from it. As surely as the Lord lives, not one hair on his head will be touched, for God helped him to do a great deed today." So the people rescued Jonathan, and he was not put to death. Then Saul called back the army from chasing the Philistines, and the Philistines returned home. A couple of important leadership principles I want us to share from this passage. First of all, in leading, it is essential that we bring clarity. We've got to be clear. We've got to bring clarity. And I say that because somehow or another, Jonathan did not get word. We always ask the question, okay, if something's going to be unveiled, if something's going to be launched, okay, what's the message? What's the message? Let's be clear about it. Let's be uniformed in it. Let's communicate the same message. The second thing is, who needs to know? Who's the most important persons at this point? And then from that point, then who needs to know beyond that? How do we communicate the message? How do we communicate the initiative? So who needs to know? Who needs to be in the room? You got to get your major players. I try to think of, okay, what leaders in this department or in this particular team need to know? And then who needs to know here? I did this just yesterday. We were talking about an initiative, and I was like, who needs to be called? Who needs to know? Who needs to get on the list? And then how do we clearly communicate? So I sent an email out, and I had 5 different things on it because I wanted to be clear. I wanted us to all be on the same page. And then from that page, what I'm doing is I'm putting up just putting up a straw man, if you will, or a straw person. And so then we can take from that and edit or come back. But you got to start somewhere. And so clarity is incredibly important. A couple things I want to say about that is Saul's men, they were so tired. They were so tired because Saul had given this thing. So bring clarity of vision. Here's the statement. Bring clarity of vision, which is rooted in prayer, considering both the short and the long-term implications. When you make a decision, consider both short and long-term implications. Always ask the question, if we do something new, which is good, you want to do new when you need to do new, when you need to launch something. But the question is, are we going to be launching something or doing something? You want to consider the fact that, is this something that would become habit forming later? And if you launch this, then will other people say, oh, okay, well, we did this, so why don't we do that? So in other words, if you have a policy, which we do, that we do not do fundraising at Christ Church, then we don't do fundraising. We don't allow one team over here or one group over here to do it, and then everybody else is not supposed to do it. You think about the repercussions of that. You just can't do that. And everybody's got to be on the same page. And Saul's men were tired. So I think Saul had a noble thought. Hey, let's fast today and let's be in battle. Okay. But what if your men have no energy? What if your men are drained? Because, I go out and plant flowers for 2 or 3 hours on a Saturday afternoon, and I'm wore out by taking the mattock and putting it in the ground and planting a bunch of flowers after I've mowed the yard. And I'm thinking, I have no idea the energy it takes to wield a sword, to dodge a spear. I mean, what does it mean to just be spent in battle? And if you're malnourished and you don't have any energy, I don't know how you can endure. So we've got to be careful about the implications of our decisions because they were famished. And here's the thing. Here's the paradox of this. Saul made a noble gesture about fasting that day, but the men were so hungry and so famished, they ended up killing the animals of the plunder. And what did they do? They were so hungry, they ate the meat without making sure the blood was drained. So they actually broke an older covenant that was started in the time of Noah and came forth in the Leviticus law, in the Mosaic law. So having the noble gesture, impulsive decision to fast that day caused them to be so famished, they actually broke a command of God. Not a command of Saul, but a command of God to make sure that the blood is drained from the meat. And so Saul caught that, had them bring it back, and then properly drain it. So first, bring clarity of vision, which is rooted in prayer, considering both short and long-term implications. Number 2, build a culture that's so strong on what is right and fair and honors God that it will spit out frauds and imposters. Build a culture that is so strong on what is right, what is fair, and honors God that it will spit out frauds and imposters. The people had to save Jonathan. The people had to say, wait a minute, if you need to discipline him in some way, fine. But we don't think his eating honey merits death. Jonathan had already sacrificially gone into the enemy's camp and already killed 20 Philistines, stirred up such a ruckus and caused all kinds of chaos in the Philistine camp. Jonathan did that for the greater good. Jonathan did that sacrificially. Jonathan did not have the authority to command that all of Israel attack the Philistines, but he did have the authority to go in as a commander and go in and stir things up and to spy on the enemy. And he did, and he caused such chaos and a ruckus that the Philistines started attacking each other, and then eventually they went in and they had the victory. The point is, the people saw that Saul's judgment was more severe than it needed to be. And they were like, this isn't fair. This isn't just. You see, if your culture is so strong on what is healthy, then that which is unhealthy comes in it, that is unhealthy or self-seeking or self-promoting and doesn't have any sense of sacrifice or the greater good in mind, then if your culture is healthy, it will spit out that which is unhealthy. And the people had fair-mindedness, and they were like, this is not wrong. This is not right. This is wrong. And they called it out, and they voiced their concern. And the third thing is, build an altar first. Build an altar first to honor God. It says in the scripture that Saul had been king for many years. Do you know when he built an altar? When he had to. I would say then, if you're going to contemporize that statement, pray daily, surrender daily to God. Because most of the time we cry out to God in prayer and we surrender almost when it's too late. I don't guess it's ever too late to surrender to God. But my point is, what if Saul had built an altar on the first day that he was king and said, "You're King of kings and Lord of lords, you're my God, and I will honor you with every breath, every decision I will submit to you as much as I possibly can, especially when it involves the lives of people and it involves your kingdom. I'm going to fully submit to you." We should surrender to God every day in prayer, not just when there's an emergency, or not just when our marriage or our family or our ministry is falling apart. We need to surrender on the first day. So if you haven't fully surrendered to God and you haven't built an altar, honoring Him with your heart, your life, I would suggest let's do that today, because tomorrow's letters don't get written. Thank you for joining us on the podcast.